No wonder that Zen has come to rescue the swordsman, or the swordsman has run to Zen for immediate help. The poems that follow, given as secrets of swordplay, all reflect the spirit of Zen, which inevitably involves the philosophy of Zen. All the following poems become intelligible when the West River waters of Baso or Daito Kokushi's Uta on the raindrops, as paradoxical as Baso's dictum, is thoroughly comprehended. First, the Uta. If your ears see and eyes hear, not a doubt you'll cherish, how naturally the rain drips from the eaves. And now the remainder of the poems. The spring is come, softly blows the wind. The peaches and apricots are in full bloom. The dews are thick in the autumnal nights. The leaves fall from the paulonia tree. The flowers, the maple leaves in autumn, and the wintry snows covering the field all white. How beautiful they are, each in its way. I fear my attachments still did not go beyond the sensuous, for I know now what reality is. Inside the sacred fence before which I bow, there must be a pond filled with clear water. As my mind moon becomes bright, I see its shadow reflected in the water. Wherever and whenever the mind is found attached to anything, make haste to detach yourself from it. When you tarry for any length of time, it will turn again into your old hometown. Abandon all the arts you have learned in swordsmanship, and in one gulp drink up all the waters of the West River. I thought all the time I was learning how to win, but I realize now to win is no more, no less than to lose. In the well not dug, in the water not filling it, a shadow is reflected, and a man with no form, no shadow, is drawing water from the well. A man with no form, no shadow, turns into a rice pounder when he pounds rice. Let me here relate a tale from an old book on swordplay, probably written by an early master of the Utoryu school, which was founded by Ito Kagehisa in the 17th century. It is the story of the swordsman and the cat. There was once a swordsman called Shoken, who was very much annoyed by a furious rat in his house. The rat was bold enough to come out of its hiding place even in the daytime, doing all kinds of mischief. Shoken made his pet cat go after it, but she was not its equal, and being bitten by it, she ran away screaming. The swordsman now hired some of the neighboring cats noted for their skill and courage in catching rats. They were let loose against the rat. Crouching in a corner, it watched the cats approach it and furiously attacked them one after the other. The cats were terrified, and all beat a retreat. The master became desperate and tried to kill the rat himself. Taking up his wooden sword, he approached it, but every effort of the experienced swordsman proved ineffectual, for the rat dodged his sword so skillfully that it seemed to be flying through the air like a bird or even lightning. Before Shoken could follow its movement, it had already made a successful leap at his head. He was perspiring heavily, and finally decided to give up the chase. As a last resort, he sent for the neighboring cat, widely known for her mysterious virtue as the most able rat-catcher. The cat did not look in any way especially different from other cats that had been invited to fight the rat. The swordsman did not think very much of her, but let her go into the room where the rat was located. The cat went in quietly and slowly, as if she were not cognizant of any unusual scene in the room. The rat, however, was extremely terrified at the sight of the approaching object, and stayed motionless, almost stupefied in the corner. The cat almost nonchalantly went for the rat, and came out carrying it by the neck. In the evening, all the cats who had participated in the rat-catching had a grand session at Shoken's house, and respectfully asked the great cat to take the seat of honor. They made profound bows before her and said, "We are all noted for valor and cunning, but never realized there was such an extraordinary rat in the world. None of us was able to do anything with it until you came, and how easily you carried the day. We all wish you to divulge your secrets for our benefit, but before that, Let us see how much we all know about the art of fighting rats." The black cat came forward and said, "I was born in a family reputed for its skill in the art. Since my kitten days I have trained myself with a view to becoming a great rat catcher. I am able to leap over a screen as high as 7 feet. I know how to squeeze myself through a tiny hole which allows a rat only. I am proficient in performing all kinds of acrobatics. I am also clever at making the rats think that I am sound asleep, but I know how to strike at them as soon as they come within my reach. Even those running over the beam cannot escape me. It is really a shame that I had to retreat before that old rat today." The great veteran cat said, "What you have learned is the technique of the art. Your mind is ever conscious of planning how to combat the opponent. The reason why the ancient masters devised the technique is to acquaint us with the proper method of accomplishing the work, and the method is naturally simple and effective, implying all the essential points of the art. Those who follow the master fail to grasp his principle and are too busily occupied with improving their technical cleverness and manipulatory skill. The end is achieved, and cleverness attains its highest efficiency, but what does it all amount to? Cleverness is an activity of the mind, no doubt, but it must be in accordance with the way. When the latter is neglected and mere cleverness is aimed at, it diverges and is apt to be abused. This is to be remembered well in the art of fighting." The tiger cat now stepped forward and expressed his view thus: "To my mind, what is important in the art of fighting is the key, the spirit. I have long trained myself in its cultivation and development. I am now in possession of the strongest spirit, which fills up heaven and earth. When I face an opponent, my overawing spirit is already on him, and victory is on my side even prior to actual combat. I have no conscious scheme as to the use of technical skill, but it comes out spontaneously according to change of situation. If a rat should be running over a beam, I would just gaze at him intensely with all my spiritual strength, and he is sure to fall by himself from the height and be my prisoner. But that old mysterious rat moved along without leaving any shadow. The reason is beyond me." The grand old cat's reply was this: "You know how to make the most of your psychic powers, but the very fact of your being conscious of it works against you. Your strong psyche stands opposed to the opponent's, and you can never be sure of yours being stronger than his, for there is always a possibility of its being surpassed. You may feel as if your active, vigorous psyche were filling the universe, but it is not the spirit itself. It is no more than its shadowy image. It may resemble Mencius' Kozen no Ki, but in reality it is not. Mencius' Ki, as we know, is bright and illuminating, and for this reason full of vigor, whereas yours gains vigor owing to conditions. Because of this difference in origin, there is a difference in its operation. The one is a great river incessantly flowing, and the other is a temporary flood after a heavy rainfall, soon exhausted when it encounters a mightier onrush. A desperate rat often proves stronger than an attacking cat. It has been cornered, the fight is for life and death, and the desperate victim harbors no desire to escape unhurt. Its mental attitude defies every possible danger which may come upon it. Its whole being incarnates the fighting ki, and no cats can withstand its steel-like resistance." The grey cat now advanced quietly and said, "As you tell us, a psyche, however strong, is always accompanied by its shadow, and the enemy is sure to take advantage of this shadow, though it may be the faintest one. I have for a long time disciplined myself in this way, not to overawe the enemy, not to force a fight, but to assume a yielding and conciliatory attitude. When the enemy proves strong, I just look yielding and simply follow up his movements. I act like a curtain surrendering itself to the pressure of a stone thrown at it. Even a strong rat finds no means to fight me, but the one we had to deal with today had no parallel. It refused to submit to my psychical overpowering, and was not tempted by my manifestation of a yielding psyche. It was a most mysterious creature, the like of which I have never seen in my life. The grand old cat answered, "What you call a yielding psyche is not in harmony with nature. It is man-made. It is a contrivance worked out in your conscious mind. When you try by means of this to crush the opponent's positive, impassioned, attacking psyche, he is quick enough to detect any sign of psychic wavering which may go on in your mind. The yielding psyche, thus artificially evoked, produces a certain degree of muddiness and obstruction in your mind, which is sure to interfere with acuteness of perception and agility of action, for then nature feels impeded in pursuing its original and spontaneous course of movement. To make nature display its mysterious way of achieving things is to do away with all your own thinking, contriving, and acting. Let nature have her own way. Let her act as it feels in you, and there will be no shadows, no signs, no traces whereby you can be caught. You have then no foes who can successfully resist you. I am not, however, going to say that all the discipline you have each so far gone through has been to no purpose. After all, the way expresses itself through its vessels. Technical contrivances hold the reason, or ri, in them. The spiritual power is operative in the body, and when it is in harmony with nature, it acts in perfect accord with environmental changes. When the yielding psyche is thus upheld, it gives a stop to fighting on the physical plane of force and is able to stand even against rocks. But there is one most essential consideration which, when neglected, is sure to upset everything. This is, not to cherish even a speck of self-conscious thought. When this is present in your mind, all your acts become self-willed, human-designed tricks, and are not in conformity with the way. It is then that people refuse to yield to your approach, and come to set up a psyche of antagonism on their part. Then you are in a state of mind known as mindlessness, or mushin. You act in unison with nature without resorting at all to artificial contrivances. The way, however, is above all limitations, and all this talk of mine is far from being exhaustive as far as the way is concerned. Some time ago there was in my neighborhood a cat who passed all her time in sleeping, showing no sign of spiritual animal power, and looking like a wooden image. People never saw her catch a single rat, but wherever she roamed about, no rats ever dared to appear in her presence. I once visited her and asked for the reason. She gave no answer. I repeated my query 4 times, but she remained silent. It was not that she was unwilling to answer, but in truth she did not know how to answer. So we note that one who knows speaks not a word, while one who speaks knows not. That old cat was forgetful not only of herself, but all things about her. She was in the highest spiritual state of purposelessness. She was the one who realized divine warriorship and killed not. I am not to be compared with her. Continued the cat, "Well, I am a mere cat. Rats are my food, and how can I know about human affairs? But if you permit me to say something further, you must remember that swordsmanship is an art of realizing at a critical moment the reason of life and death. It is not meant just to defeat your opponent. A samurai ought to be always mindful of this fact and discipline himself in a spiritual culture as well as in the technique of swordsmanship. First of all, therefore, he is to have an insight into the reason of life and death when his mind is free from thoughts of selfishness. This being attained, he cherishes no doubts, no distracting thoughts. He is not calculating, nor does he deliberate. His spirit is even and yielding and at peace with the surroundings. He is serene and empty-minded, and thus he is able to respond freely to changes taking place from moment to moment in his environment. On the other hand, when a thought or desire is stirred in his mind, it calls up a world of form. There is I, there is not I, and contradictions ensue. As long as this opposition continues, the way finds itself restricted and blocked. Its free activities become impossible. Your spirit is already pushed into the darkness of death, altogether losing its mysterious native brightness. How can you expect in this state of mind to rise and wager your fate against the opponent? Even when you come out victorious, it is no more than accidental and decidedly against the spirit of swordsmanship. By purposelessness is not meant mere absence of things where vacant nothingness prevails. The spirit is by nature formless, and no objects are to be harbored in it. When anything is harbored there, your psychic energy is drawn toward it, and when your psychic energy loses its balance, its native activity becomes cramped and no more flows with the stream. Where the energy is tipped, there is too much of it in one direction, while in another there is a shortage. Where it is too much, it overflows and cannot be controlled. Where there is a shortage, it is not sufficiently nourished and shrivels up. In both cases, it is unable to cope with ever-changing situations, but when there prevails a state of purposelessness, which is also a state of mindlessness, the spirit harbors nothing in it, nor is it tipped in any one direction. It transcends both subject and object. It responds empty-mindedly to environmental vicissitudes and leaves no tracks. We read in the Book of Changes, the I Ching, there is in it no thinking, no doing, or no willing, absolute quietness, and no motion, but it feels, and when it acts, it flows through any objects and events of the world. When this is understood in connection with the art of swordsmanship, one is nearer to the way. After listening intently to the wisdom of the cat, Shokan proposed this question. What is meant by, there is neither the subject nor the object? Replied the cat, because of the self there is the foe. When there is no self, there is no foe. The foe means an opposition, as the male is opposed to the female, and fire to water. Whatever things have form exist necessarily in opposition. When there are no signs of thought movement stirred in your mind, no conflicts of opposition take place there. And when there are no conflicts, one trying to get the better of the other, this is known as neither foe nor self. When, further, the mind itself is forgotten, together with signs of thought movement, you enjoy a state of absolutely doing nothingness. You are in a state of perfectly quiet passivity. You are in harmony with the world. You are one with it. While the foe form ceases to exist, you are not conscious of it, nor can it be said that you are altogether unconscious of it. Your mind is cleansed of all thought movements, and you act only when there is a prompting from the unconscious. When your mind is thus in a state of absolutely doing nothingness, the world is identified with yourself, which means that you make no choice between right and wrong, like and dislike, and are above all forms of abstraction. Such conditions as pleasure and pain, gain and loss, are creations of your own mind. The whole universe is indeed not to be sought after outside the mind. An old poet sings, when there is a particle of dust in your eye, the triple world becomes a narrow path. Have your mind completely free from objects, and how much this life expands. When even a tiny particle of sand gets into the eye, we cannot keep it open. The eye may be likened to the mind, which by nature is brightly illuminating and free from objects, but as soon as an object enters there, its virtue is lost. It is said again that when one is surrounded by an enemy hundreds of thousands in strength, this form, known as myself, may be crushed to pieces. But the mind is mine, with which no overwhelming army can have anything to do. Says Confucius, even a plain man of the street cannot be deprived of his will. When, however, this mind is confused, it turns to be its own enemy. This is all I can explain here, for the master's task cannot go beyond transmitting technique and illustrating the reason for it. It is yourself who realizes the truth of it. The truth is self-attained. It is transmitted from mind to mind. It is a special transmission outside the scriptural teachings. There is here no willful deviation from traditional teaching, for even the master is powerless in this respect. nor is this confined to the study of Zen. From the mind training initiated by the ancient sages down to various branches of art, self-realization is the keynote of them all, and it is transmitted from mind to mind, a special transmission outside the scriptural teaching. What is performed by scriptural teaching is to point out for you what you have within yourself. There is no transference of secrets from master to disciple. Teaching is not difficult. Listening is not difficult either. But what is truly difficult is to become conscious of what you have in yourself and be able to use it as your own. This self-realization is known as seeing into one's own being, which is Satori. Satori is an awakening from a dream. Awakening and self-realization and seeing into one's own being. These are synonymous. A recent writer on the way of the sword and its history remarks to the following effect in regard to the principle of the art. In Kendo, the way of the sword, what is most essential to attain besides its technique is the spiritual element controlling the art throughout. It is a state of mind known as munen or muso, no thought or no reflection. This does not mean just to be without thoughts, ideas, feelings, etc. when you stand with the sword before the opponent. It means letting your natural faculties act in a consciousness free from thoughts, reflections, or affections of any kind. This state of mind is also known as egolessness, muga, or non-atman, in which you cherish no egoistic thoughts, no consciousness of your own attainments. The so-called spirit of sabi shiori, solitariness, running through saigyo or basho, must also have come from the psychic state of egolessness. This is often likened to the lunar reflection in water. Neither the moon nor water has any preconceived idea of producing the incident designated by us as the moon in water. Water is in a state of no-mindness as much as the moon. But when there is a sheet of water, the moon is seen in it. The moon is but one, but its reflections are seen wherever there is water. When this is understood, your art is perfect. Finally, Zen and the sword's way are one in this, that both ultimately aim at transcending the duality of life and death. From of old this has been recognized by masters of the sword, and the great ones have invariably knocked at the gate of Zen, as is instanced in the case of Yagyu Tajima no Kami and Takuan, and of Miyamoto Musashi and Shunzan. The writer of the aforementioned book gives an interesting piece of information, that in the feudal days of Japan, a master of the sword or the spear was often called an osho, a master or teacher, upadhyana in Sanskrit, which is the title commonly given to a Buddhist priest. The origin of this custom is traceable to the fact that there was once a great monk in the Kofukuji temple of Nara. He belonged to one of the minor temples called Jizoen under the jurisdiction of the Kofukuji. He was an expert of the spear, and all the Jizoen monks learned the art from him. He was naturally an osho to all his disciples, and the title came to be transferred to all the masters, both of the spear and the sword, irrespective of their Buddhist qualifications. The hall in which swordsmanship is practiced is called a dojo. Dojo is the name of a place devoted to religious exercises, and its original Sanskrit meaning, Bodhi Mandala, is the place of enlightenment. There is no doubt the name was borrowed from Zen Buddhism. There is another thing the swordsman learned from Zen. In olden days they used to travel all over Japan in order to perfect themselves in the art by experiencing every form of hardship which might befall them, and by undergoing training in the various schools of swordsmanship. The example was furnished by the Zen monks, who did the same thing before they attained final enlightenment. This practice is known among the monks as angia, traveling on foot, whereas the swordsman called it musha shugyo, training in warriorship. I do not know how early this practice started among the swordsmen, but we read about the founder of the Shinkage Ryu traveling all over the country. One incident connects him with a Zen monk, both of whom were engaged in a similar form of training. One day, when Kami Idzumi Ise no Kami was passing through a small village in a remote mountain district, he found the people in extreme excitement. A desperate outlaw had taken refuge in a deserted house, snatching away a little village boy with him, and threatened to kill the victim if the villagers attempted to arrest or do harm to the criminal himself. Ise no Kami realized the grave situation. Seeing a monk pass by, who was no doubt a wandering Zen monk, the swordsman asked him to lend him his monkish robe for a while. He had his head shaved, so as to appear a genuine monk. He approached the deserted house with 2 lunchboxes, and told the outlaw that the child's parents did not wish to see it die of starvation, and commissioned him to give it something to eat. So saying, he threw out one of the boxes before the man. Ise no Kami then continued, "As you yourself may be hungry, I had another box prepared for you." When the desperado stretched his arm to receive it, the monk swordsman lost no time in seizing him by the arm and forcibly throwing him down on the ground, made him a complete prisoner. The monkish robe was returned to its original owner, who praised him highly, saying, "You are truly a man of the sword," and gave him a kara, a symbol of monkhood, which is generally carried by a Zen monk over his chest hanging from his neck, a kind of abridged kesa. It is said that Ise no Kami never parted with it. The wandering Zen monk could not have been a mere novice in Zen. He must have been one of some understanding. A man of the sword is a phrase much used in Zen to denote a seasoned Zen monk who has really gone beyond the bounds of life and death. Ise no Kami must have indeed had good reason for treasuring the kara as a gift from the monk traveling on foot. It was probably sometime in the 17th century that the following story was circulated among the swordsmen, showing that the relationship between swordplay and Zen was one of the topics they were most interested in. The story is, as the author suggests, probably a fiction, but the fact that such a story came to be told proves that the swordsmen were very much concerned with Zen, and also that Zen was regarded as something highly mystifying and able to achieve some wonders even against an expert swordsman. The story is quoted from a book called Geiken Sodan in 5 fascicles, compiled by Minamoto Tokushu in 1844. It is a collection of stories of swordsmanship, giving histories of the various schools, their founders, and some anecdotes. There was a school known as Teshin Ryu, which flourished in certain localities west of Kyoto toward the end of the 17th century and extending into the 18th. The originator of this school was known as Otsuka Teshin. He had a great liking for swordplay, and while still young became quite an expert. He was ambitious and wished to try his skill with men of the same profession outside his own province, so as to make his name better known in wider circles. He was well acquainted with a Zen abbot residing at a nearby monastery, and he visited him to say goodbye. The abbot's name was Ryuko. He belonged to the Soto sect of Zen, and was a renowned master of the day. When Teshin spoke to him regarding his enterprise, the abbot advised him against it, saying, "We are living in a much wider world than you may think, and there must be many men of your profession who are far more skillful, and the outcome of your adventure will be disastrous." The young man, however, was obdurate against taking the advice kindly. Ryuko continued, "Look at myself. I also wanted to be better known in the world. I have been practicing meditation here for the last few decades, and how many disciples have I now? As to yourself, you have hardly anyone calling himself your pupil. We each have to know where we are and be content with the situation." This incensed Teshin very much, so that he excitedly exclaimed, "Do you think my sword is of no worth? Swordsmanship is not like your discipline. If I go out of my hometown and challenge someone well known in his district and beat him, the event will naturally be talked about among his friends and pupils. If I meet another in another district and defeat him, my reputation will gradually be spread throughout the neighborhood. Besides, I am firmly convinced of my attainment in swordsmanship. I am not afraid of any encounter which may turn up in my tour." Ryuko could not help smiling at his self-conceit. "You had better start with the one who is right in front of you. If you come out victorious, you may undertake the grand tour throughout the whole country. In case, however, you lose, you must promise to become a monk and be my disciple." At this, Teshin, laughing heartily, said, "You may be great in your Zen, but surely you are no swordsman. If you wish to try your luck, however, I am ready." Ryuko gave him a bamboo stick that had been found nearby, and then provided himself with a hosu. This is generally carried by a Zen priest. It consists of a short stick and a tuft of horsetail, and was originally for shooing away mosquitoes. Teshin, full of confidence, tried to knock the Zen master down with one blow of his stick, but the stick completely missed the opponent, who was no longer within its reach. Teshin was exasperated, and tried again and again to reach him, but all to no purpose. Instead, he frequently felt the hosu gently sweeping over his face. Ryuko finally remarked, "What would you say now?" Teshin's braggart air was utterly crushed. He humbly acknowledged his defeat. Ryuko lost no time in calling to his attendants to bring all the needed instruments to cut off Teshin's hair and turn him into a regular monk with a shaven head. Now, Minamoto, the author, comments, "This is most likely a story fabricated by Zen men. If Ryuko, besides being a Zen master, were not somehow acquainted with the art of swordsmanship, he could never beat Teshin as is told in the story. Otherwise, Teshin knew nothing of the art as he claimed. It is true that there are many points where Zen and swordplay go hand in hand. For instance, when they refer to no room being left even for a hair to be inserted between, or of a spark of the flint striking steel. The dictum applies not only to Zen, but also generally to the art of swordplay, for no school can ignore going through this momentous training. However excellently qualified in every way as a Zen master, if he had no training at all in the technique of the sword, he could never expect to win a contest with a full-fledged swordsman. The fact is that the perfect art of swordsmanship consists in mastery of both technique and principle. While there is no doubt about the all-importance of spiritual training, one is also to be fully familiar with the practical details of swordplay. From the professional point of view, Minamoto's idea is correct, I think. A parallel training in technique and principle. But there is at least one other school that emphasizes the spiritual side of the art, though not necessarily neglecting the technique. Its chief exponent, Hori Kintayu, who lived from 1688 to 1755, desired to utilize swordsmanship as the means to help one in his spiritual attainment and character building. His reasoning deserves consideration in more ways than one, as it sheds light not only on swordsmanship, but on samuraiship generally. There has been much misunderstanding in the West as regards the spirit, function, and discipline of the samurai, who were the ruling class of Japan during her feudal days, especially in the Tokugawa regime. Kimura's point of view, as developed in the Kenjutsu Fushiki-hen, in regard to Hori, the swordsman's discourse, may be summed up as follows. The perfect swordsman avoids quarreling or fighting. Fighting means killing. How can one human being bring himself to kill a fellow being? We are all meant to love one another and not to kill. It is abhorrent that one should be thinking all the time of fighting and coming out victorious. We are moral beings. We are not to lower ourselves to the status of animality. What is the use of becoming a fine swordsman if he loses his human dignity? The best thing is to be a victor without fighting. The sword is an inauspicious instrument to kill in some unavoidable circumstances. When it is to be used, therefore, it ought to be the sword that gives life, and not the sword that kills. But when a man is born into the samurai family, he is not to shun learning the art of swordplay, for it is his profession to be trained in it. The point is, however, to utilize the art as a means to advance in the study of the way, or Tao. When it is properly handled, it helps us in an efficient way to contribute to the cultivation of the mind and spirit. One great advantage the sword has over mere book reading is that once you make a false move, you are sure to give the opponent a chance to beat you. You have to be on the alert all the time. While to be on the alert is not the ultimate of swordsmanship, it keeps you true to yourself. That is to say, you are not allowed to indulge in idle thinking. Thinking is useful in many ways, but there are some occasions when thinking interferes with the work, and you have to leave it behind and let the unconscious come forward. In such cases you cease to be your own conscious master, but become an instrument in the hands of the unknown. The unknown has no ego consciousness, and consequently no thought of winning the contest, because it moves at the level of non-duality, where there is neither subject nor object. It is for this reason that the sword moves where it ought to move, and makes the contest end victoriously. This is the practical application of Lao Tzu's doctrine of doing by not doing. Sun Tzu, a great authority on warfare, says, "It is not the best thing to win every battle one is engaged in. The best thing is to win without planning to win. This is perfect victory." To be on the alert means to be deadly serious. To be deadly serious means to be sincere to oneself, and it is sincerity that finally leads one to discover the heavenly way. The heavenly way is above the self, which is mushin, no mind, or munen, no thought. When mushin is realized, the mind knows no obstructions, no inhibitions, and is emancipated from the thoughts of life and death, gain and loss, victory and defeat. As long as a man is possessed of the thought of defeating the enemy, his mind will be kept fully occupied with all kinds of scheming to attain this end. If, however, the enemy happens to be more proficient in technical tactics, which is very likely the case, the defeat will not be on the side of the enemy. If both are equally matched, the outcome will be mutual killing. When a scheme meets a scheme, this is the inevitable fate. Therefore, the perfect swordsman goes beyond all manner of dichotomy, and it is in this way that he is more than a mere wielder of the sword. The samurai carries two swords, a long and a short, and it is his profession to be trained in their use. But he ought not to be thinking of exercising power and making an appeal to the sword that kills, for the sense of power is always liable to be abused. The sword, therefore, is to be an instrument to kill the ego, which is the root of all quarrels and fightings. The Yagyu school makes the drinking in one gulp of the waters of the West River the culmination of training in swordsmanship, so far as its principle is concerned. The technical details are to be subordinated to the principle which really constitutes the spiritual personality of the swordsman. The school represented by Hori Kintayu primarily belongs to the original school of Yagyu Tajima no Kami, and it was Yagyu himself who traced every stage of sword training to Zen Buddhism, as advocated by Takuan, his teacher. The waters of the West River, as I have already stated, comes from Baso's answer to Ho, the layman, whose question was, "Who is he that stands all alone with no company in the midst of the 10,000 objects?" I do not know if those swordsmen, who somewhat glibly refer to this Zen dictum, all understood what it really meant. Judging from the way they write about it, I am afraid they had no personal experience of it. While this might have been true, what is most remarkable is that they somehow connected the waters of the West River with the ultimate principle that controls the unconscious proceedings of swordsmanship. Even when they had all mastered the detailed intricacies of technique, they could not be termed perfect swordsmen unless they dived deeply into the West River and interviewed the one who has no companion in the midst of the 10,000 objects. Probably the motive that prompted Kimura Kyuho, the disciple of Hori Kintayu, to write this short treatise on swordsmanship and call it the unknown in the art of swordplay, was that in his day there were probably very few sword players who really understood Baso. Let me finish with the quotation making up the conclusion of Kimura's, or rather Hori's, dialogue. Question. All that you say is fine. I am in complete agreement with you. But how difficult it is to apply it to practical details of the art. Answer. The point is to realize that all that is expressible by symbols or letters is secondary, that they are no more than mere tracks. So Zen masters refuse to acknowledge that letters or words are final. What is important is to reach the ultimate substance by means of those tracks, or letters, or symbols. The ultimate reality itself is not a symbol. It leaves no tracks. It cannot be communicated by letters or words. But we come to it by tracing them to the source where they come forth. As long as we stop at symbolization or mere speculation, we cannot realize the principle. Question. When we give up symbolization or speculation, are we not left in the utter nothingness of things? Answer. Yes, it is of the utmost difficulty to come to a realization. Therefore, the masterly trainer is always careful to train the beginners along the parallel lines of technical exercises and the understanding of the principle. The latter may not come to a man even throughout his life. The main business is to seek it not in things external, but within oneself. Question. In this case, there is no secret transmission in swordsmanship either? Answer. The last thing can never be transmitted from one person to another. It comes from within oneself. All the technical discipline is meant to make swordsmen finally see this. It is also the case with learning generally. There is not much use in mere scholarship. You may read all the books there are on the subject of spiritual training and attainment, but the culmination is to realize the mystery of being, and the realization is from within yourself, for it cannot come from anywhere else. If it does, it is not yours, but somebody else's. Question. Can you tell me something about this mystery? Answer. All that I can say is that I do not know, or that it is not intelligible. Question. If so, are we meant to remain utter simpletons? Answer. No, not that. It is to know and yet not to know. Question. Why? Answer. No why. It is to know as though not knowing. The last word I can say is, it is beyond knowledge.